Okay, Mr. Gutierrez, thank you so much for giving us your time. The first question is probably an obvious one. Why do you want this job?
You know, Natalie, if you'd have asked me on May 23rd of 2022 if I was going to run or wanted to run for the United States Senate, I probably would have told you were crazy. But then May 24th happened, and so many children passed away. And as that unfolded, you started to see kind of the government failure. And you know, as we reflect over the last year and a half, and what happened there in Uvalde and what's happened in this state, we're starting to see a state that's truly broken. And it's broken just about on every political position. And it's broken because of people like Ted Cruz that have done nothing to try to fix it, nothing to try to heal the wounds, nothing to try to do the things that people in government are supposed to do. You know, when you look at education in Texas, we are one of the most robust economies by any state in the United States. And yet we are 45th in education spending, we're 45th in education performance. We're dead last on funding for mental health care. We've got people that are in office that refuse to do Medicaid expansion, which essentially gives health care to working class families at no cost to them. So every year they're dipping in $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 to handle their health care costs. Ted Cruz could have fixed that. He could have said, rogue governors are not going to be allowed to do that. We're going to allow them to do Medicaid expansion, and we're going to mandate it as a federal right, as a federal obligation. You know, he hasn't done that because he doesn't care. He doesn't care about people. And so when you look at everything from education to infrastructure, and certainly, you know, common sense gun reform, we have a person that's sitting in the United States Senate that has done absolutely nothing to help ordinary Texans. If we look at the winter grid, well, we all know what he did. While the rest of us were here dealing with all of that, trying to help our constituents, he ran off to Cancun. I get it. He wanted to be with his family, but the fact is, we were in the middle of the worst winter storm in our state's history, and 800 people died. You have a responsibility as a public servant to help people. No one expected him to, you know, sit out on a power line. Just be here. Understand what your constituents were going through. I did that along with many other officials. I went out and gave water to nursing homes in Poteet and Lytle because I didn't have any drinking water. Got in my four-wheel drive. A Walmart was open, thank God. Put a pallet of water on my truck. County judge in Camp Wood, Texas, she said, we got plenty of water. We don't have any baby formula. And we have a lot of people that are on the margins that need baby formula and diapers. This was day 3. The Walmarts were beginning to open up. Bought everything I could and took it to Camp Wood. That's what somebody does in public service. If you choose to get into this game, that's what you do. You go and you help people. And that's what I was raised to do. That's what I'll continue to do. And I'll keep fighting for people.
Ted Cruz has squeaked out his victories in the last 2 elections. Where do you see the path to victory?
Listen, I don't know about just fine. The last election he was in was, I think O'Rourke took him to about 280,000 votes. And that's substantial. Our state is ever changing day after day. More people are moving in, more people are turning 18. Hispanics are leading this thing, but I don't want to play pundit. You know, we have to get people to understand and talk about core values that we were all raised with. You know, my parents taught me to work hard. I'm going to work hard in this race to communicate what's going on in Texas, to talk about this lie that we've been living for some time. We have Republicans in office that call this a Texas miracle, including Ted Cruz. And when things go wrong, they want to blame some immigrant for the problems of Texas. Well, there's not an immigrant that is responsible for the poor education outcomes. that is responsible for the poor healthcare outcomes, the poor electrical grid outcomes, the fact that we don't have common sense gun solutions. 66% of Republican voters want to have common sense gun solutions, extreme risk protective orders. If someone's mentally ill, let's go take those guns away. Age limit on access to an AR-15 to 21. Closing the gun show loophole. Those are the things that make sense. You know, I'm not a prognosticator and I'm not a pundit. I'm just a man that has volunteered in public service for the last 20 years. I've worked hard for those 20 years, and I'm going to continue to work hard. I think that when people hear our message, they understand where I came from. They understand that I was born and raised in this state. And they understand that there's a real value in hard work. I think that they're going to see a different message, and it's my hope that we get them to support our campaign and our candidacy.
You bring up people hearing your message. You will first face Colin Allred in the Democratic primary. What makes you different than him?
You know, I don't know Colin Allred. I've spoken to him one time. He called me about 60 days ago. I'm sure he's a nice person. The fact is, I've done a heck of a lot more than he has in public service. I've been in public office volunteering as a city council person, a state representative, and a state senator. I've done things in a Republican body that shouldn't have been done, including last week, adding an amendment to this tax plan to make sure that we're getting our teachers paid. Established the Farmer Suicide Prevention Act last session. Our own ag commissioner, Sid Miller, said because of my amendment, we saved 60 farmers' lives. Farmers have the highest incidence of suicide in this country. Established the National Center for Warrior Resiliency, which is a PTSD center here in San Antonio that takes veterans off of their opioid addiction and helps them treat their mental health in a different way. We have to look at what is ailing us and work hard to communicate it and make sure that people are doing that. I think that my performance along the past several years will show people that I've gotten big things done. And so, no disrespect to Mr. Allred, he's not my opponent. My opponent is Ted Cruz. And I expect that I'll be in that general election against Ted Cruz. I expect that because people understand where I come from and what I've done. And they'll know where my heart is. And they'll know that this person works. More than anything, I was raised to be a worker. My parents were immigrants to this country. And at their core was work and education. Work hard and educate yourself because no one can take away your education. And that's what I've done.
You've been the leading voice for the Uvalde school shooting families. You've talked about the toll it has taken on you, the experience as a whole. You've talked about the video that you have seen and signed an NDA to see. Are you emotionally prepared for a statewide race?
That was the hardest thing I've ever done and seen my whole life. I had leaders in this state tell me, Roland, there's a reason we don't look at the videos. But I had to see the failure. And I had to see the hours, and I've seen hundreds of hours of that failure. I had to see it because it's the only way to fix it. You're damn right we have to look at the videos. We have to see how state officers mishandled the situation, and in that mishandling, more kids died, teachers died. 4 people came out of there with a pulse. Those 4 people died. Eva Mireles died in an ambulance because they couldn't get her out of the parking lot. It was failure after failure after failure. And yeah, I've been emotional at times. I've gotten to know those families. They are my friends. And I love them and I care for them. And they're never going to stop this fight because they don't want this to happen to anybody else. And I'm not likely to ever stop talking about them and their story. They are truly wonderful people. And those little kids are angels. You know, we have the magic of Facebook. And I see those little children's videos when they were alive. And I see every day how their parents are coping now. And I talk to several of them every week. And this has changed me, for sure. And it has changed my life and how I see the world. And I understand that for whatever's left of my life, I'm on the back end of it. We have to do everything in our power to change the course of what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Texas. And we really have to look at our better angels and figure out how we're going to help each other and figure out laws that make sense, that rise us all up, because we really are in this together. And so we can't afford a guy like Ted Cruz who only divides us, who only has divisive politics in his heart, votes against the Infrastructure Act that provided $66 billion in funding to Texas. But yet he goes to all of the ribbon cuttings for the bridges, or in his hometown of Houston, the port that's getting fixed, the seawall. You can't say, oh, I did this when you vote against it. You just can't do that. Votes against the Safer Communities Act, which we need to do more on that on the federal level on common sense gun solutions. But it did a lot on domestic violence, and yet he voted against it. Voted against the debt ceiling because I guess he would rather us be bankrupt as a nation than to do what's right. And so we have to stop thinking less about Republican and Democrat politics and more about who we are as Americans, who we are as human beings. That's why I'm doing this. Because this man his values are not Texas values. And I know it because his actions don't represent our values. We deserve so much more. And I don't know if I'm that messenger. But I can tell you that I'm going to run across Texas and I'm going to tell people the truth.
Staying on the topic of Uvalde, you said Austin, the capital, has done nothing for gun reform, for gun safety, to solve any of the problems that contributed to Uvalde. Washington has been described as less effective. What do you think you can get done in Washington?
Well, look, Washington passed a federal law. This president passed a federal law called the Safer Communities Act, which will even bring more money to Texas. Even though we didn't implement extreme risk protective orders, there were some other caveats in there if you had drug court programs and such that we would get those monies. At the end of the day, we need to do more on that. We need to continue to look at nationally raising the age on access to an assault rifle like an AR-15. People need to be very aware of what this gun is. The Armalite rifle is the M16 that was invented for Vietnam. It is a weapon of war. The inventor never imagined that it would be used the way it's used today in our streets. We can't go to the mall. We can't go to church. We can't send our kid to the grocery store without worrying, or even school, without worrying what's going to happen today. The chaos that is ensued in the United States and in Texas is absolutely the fault of loose Republican gun laws. We can't have everybody having a gun. There are mentally ill people that should not have access to weapons. And that's why Florida instituted extreme risk protective orders, 9,000 successfully executed orders where a parent says, hey, listen, my kid has got this gun and he's making threats. Law enforcement goes in there, takes those guns, they go to court. It's that simple. We have nothing like that in place if a kid, like the kid in Uvalde, if someone would have said, this kid is making threats. We have nothing there to safeguard our community in this state. So we'll continue to do this. We'll continue to push in Washington. And we'll continue to push across this nation for common sense gun reform.
Mr. Gutierrez, where is Ted Cruz most vulnerable next year?
Listen, I think he's vulnerable because he hasn't done anything for Texas. He really hasn't done anything for us. Now he's running for office again. He's trying to be Mr. Bipartisan, trying to go down to the border and say, we need to lift these obstructions to getting these bridges up and running in the valley and one near Laredo. His only trips to the border before have been to lambast this immigration issue, to blame that for all of the problems of Texas education, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it, broadband. By the way, he voted against the broadband bill. This man has done nothing to give us the goods and services of government. Let's be very clear. Texans are not receiving the benefit of the bargain. What do I mean by that? You and I, we pay our taxes. And for that, we expect something in return. Fix our highways, fix our roads, provide adequate health care, education, electrical infrastructure where if it gets cold, 800 people don't die. That's the benefit of the bargain. That's the deal that we make. When government fails to do that, well, our public servants should say, well, this is something wrong. We need to fix it. Not only did Ted Cruz run off to Cancun, he did nothing to fix it. It's real simple. You want to fix the electrical grid in Texas? It's not giving more money to electric supply companies. It's tie on to the eastern grid and the western grid. East Texas and El Paso are tied on to the eastern and western grid. Their power didn't go out. The vast majority of 90% of Texas has its own electrical compliance agency. It's called ERCOT. And ERCOT failed us. It continues to fail us today because Republicans in power in Texas and Ted Cruz refuse to do anything about it. Fix the problems, man. When I was on city council, people wanted their potholes, their curbs, their sidewalks. I built a library. Do those things. Do the things that the basic things of government. Don't sit there and talk on your podcast. Don't sit there and tell us, how wonderful you are or how demonic these other people are. Don't sit here and talk about LGBTQ issues. Don't talk about any of those things. Fix the problems that are ailing us. Every Texan, every American deserves to have a healthcare system that works. And while the Affordable Care Act has done great things, it still needs tremendous improvement. We have to look at that. There are people that are hurting in this state that are making minimum wage. Imagine that. $7.25 an hour. That's minimum wage in Texas, in the United States. It was established in 2009. That was the last time we did that. Because Ted Cruz said, hey, let's raise the minimum wage? Absolutely not. My kid nephew got his first job in California. He's making $15.50 an hour. That's minimum wage in California. And some would say, well, it costs a little bit more. Sure, but not that much more. We have to have people have the opportunity to succeed. And if we don't give them opportunity, we're going to be stuck in mediocrity or worse. People have to have opportunity. And Ted Cruz and others like him, they need to be cognizant of the fact that people are hurting. And so you ask me where he's most vulnerable? He doesn't have a clue. Or he doesn't care enough to have a clue as to what is hurting Texas, hurting our Texas, hurting Texas people.
You're an immigration attorney in San Antonio. Where do you stand on border security?
Listen, I voted against these border security bills because they're nonsense. They're political stunts by Greg Abbott and others to waste our taxpayer dollars, to house some migrants, from time to time. Listen, we deport thousands of people every day. They don't talk about that. Most people get deported. That's the reality. Not their talking point. That's reality. Biden administration needs to talk a little bit more about that reality. We need to certainly fix our immigration visa program. Our ranchers and our farmers want to fix the H-2A visa program. We need to absolutely fix it. Drop the the seasonal components. Go back to the Bracero program that got my father into the United States in 1950. And allow people to come up to live this American dream into the industries that need it, right? We've got construction workers in South Texas, in all parts of Texas, that absolutely we have those jobs need to be filled. There are many jobs in this United States that Americans simply don't want to work. We have to go out and fix that immigration visa system. And we can do that. As far as security is concerned, half of the AR-15s that are sold in the United States end up in the hands of cartels in Mexico. We do need to be aggressive. We need to do what we did in Colombia. Get the DEA involved. Infiltrate Mexican cartels because they're hurting our economy, they're hurting our people, and they're hurting folks in our southern border in Mexico that happens to be our largest trading partner. So if we want to get real about it, sure, we do need to do some things on security that are real at the federal level. The state stunts, Greg Abbott's stunts, are simply that. So he's giving rides to people that have already processed, that are 3 months away from a work permit. Sends them to New York, Massachusetts, California, just to make himself look good. Well, there's plenty of people in hospitality, ranching, and farming in Texas that would love to be able to have those folks work for them because they can't find Americans that want to do that job. They want to stand and pick fruit or vegetables in 115-degree weather in South Texas. We have to have a real discussion on immigration, not the political football that people play in Washington, and not the stunts that Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz like to talk about. Ted Cruz, and I don't want to bring this back to guns, but the San Jacinto deal, the mass shooting, he said, and there you have it, an immigrant killed these people. No, man, it's your loose gun laws that got that immigrant to have that gun. So we have to have a real discussion on all of it, on immigration, on guns, on healthcare, on education. We have to focus on the real issues that are affecting us all, rather than finding the boogeyman and blaming that problem, because they blame immigration for everything that ails us in Texas. And that's just a bunch of crap, and it's a lie. It's not true. We're going to talk to people about the truth. I hope they're listening because it affects them. The fact that Ted Cruz doesn't do anything on health care costs them about $10,000 a year out of their own pockets. Imagine that.
How much more should the U.S. become in the war in Ukraine?
Listen, Ukraine is about democracy. And we must fight to maintain democracy in Ukraine or any part of the world. Because when it's challenged, it affects us. We cannot allow fascist dictators like Putin to take us back to World War II. We cannot allow ourselves to be in a situation where they overrun countries in Europe. Cannot happen. Must not happen. And just like democracy is challenged there, it's also eroding here. We have Republicans in Houston specifically that passed laws to say, Harris County, Houston, Texas, you're going to have special election laws, and we can challenge your laws. That's the same kind of fascism at the hands of Republicans in Texas. Yeah, it's a bit extreme to compare what's happening here on our voting rights laws to what's going on across the world in Ukraine. But we need to understand as a populace, as a people, that we cannot tell someone how to vote. And when they do vote, that's their vote. You don't get to discount it. You don't get to say King's X. You don't get to say, time out, I'm not happy with that result, like Donald Trump wanted to do. Find me 12,000 votes. That's just nonsense. This is America. It is the principal, foundational core of our democratic society across the world. That's this country. And we as Americans can't allow ourselves to fall into this dialogue that Ted Cruz and others want us to be in.
Should the U.S. military protect Taiwan against an invasion from China?
Listen, we have to do everything in our power to protect our partners. Taiwan is certainly a partner, leads the world in semiconductor production. But we'll do everything diplomatically first. You know, China right now is in tremendous crisis economically. For all of their saber rattling that we see on TV, they've got to handle what's going on at home. Our interest rates are higher because we're trying to control inflationary pressures. Their interest rates right now are at zero because they want to try to breathe some life into their Chinese economy that they shut down because they didn't know how to handle COVID very well. And so for everything that people see on TV, you got to read, you got to think about it a little bit. And so I don't think that we're going to see that as a real threat anytime soon. There's plenty of economic pressures and economic diplomacy that can be had with China before anything happens in Taiwan. That's just the reality of things.
Before moving on, briefly, what is the greatest threat facing the United States right now?
It's fascism. It's fascism. People like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis that want to go after Disney, want to blame everything on immigration. They scream nationalist. They wrap themselves around the flag. You know what? I'm all about the United States of America. It's the country that gave my father the opportunity to be able to have his son run for the United States Senate. And that's pretty amazing. But the country that I was raised in wasn't about burning books, wasn't about telling women what to do with their bodies, wasn't about blaming people on the margins, gay and lesbian, transgender, and trying to shame them and blame them for what's truly ailing us. We deserve so much more from our leaders. We deserve a real understanding of what's wrong, and we deserve that they begin to talk about it and solve the problems. This is not about just staying in office because you're making money or you like power or whatever. You have to do things. You have to fix things. Like I said earlier, when you and I were kids, your congressman would come back home from Washington, your senator, and they would say, Kay Bailey would come and say, I brought this money to San Antonio to build this highway, this stretch of highway, this bridge, this school, this hospital. We need to fix America again. Our infrastructure is failing. Our emotional state is failing. We need to heal ourselves, and it's only going to happen if each and every one of us takes part in this democracy and doesn't buy in to those fascist influences that we're seeing every day from people like Ted Cruz. That's the biggest problem.
Moving on to the first opponent you will face, Mr. Colin Allred. He's already raised $6.2 million. You're about to announce and start the fundraising yourself. How much money are you going to need to get through to the Senate primary?
You know, listen, I don't play pundit. I don't play campaign manager. I have people that do that. We're going to go across this state and talk to people. All I need is enough of a tank of gas in my pickup to go town to town and talk to folks. I still go to the grocery store, still go to Home Depot. And when I go and I talk to people and I ask them and they talk to me about what they're hurting, the price of eggs for a while, right? Bread. They talk about the things that are hurting them at home, their pocketbook. We're going to have that discussion over the next several months. And I think that what people are going to find is that I'm a listener and I'm a worker. And all my life, I've tried to fix things. As a lawyer, as a public servant, I've tried to fix things. Cut through all the crap and fix things. I have nothing to say about Colin Allred or his money. I'm sure that people will find our candidacy relevant and credible, and I'm sure that they'll help us support our campaign. But we're going to have a real discussion with folks. Not a Washington discussion, a Texas discussion. We're going to talk about our pain, and we're going to talk about how to fix that pain.
You mentioned putting gas in your pickup, going around Texas, having these important discussions with fellow Texans. Beto O'Rourke vibes there. Do you have a tentative plan to, a map of Texas pinpointed places that you plan to go? What is your tentative plan?
Listen, we're gonna go everywhere we need to go all across the state and talk to people. We'll do that. And no real formula. Like I said, I have people that do that. But it's my intent to sit down with people in the Valley and Dallas and Houston, El Paso and Corpus and everywhere in between, Austin, and have a discussion. Beto O'Rourke ignited Texans. I hope we can have the same kind of impact. But more importantly, I just want to have a real discussion about what their needs are. I think I know. And I think I know what we need to do to fix it. We're going to just talk. And we're going to work. And I'll outwork all of them. I'll outwork Colin Allred. And I'll work harder than Ted Cruz. And I'm sure Colin's a nice guy, but I'm going to outwork him. Because that's the way I was raised.
When do you plan to announce your campaign?
So we'll be, as you know, we've announced today through this video launch. And from there, we will be going to different towns and having town halls across the way. And really, come September is when we'll begin the larger rallies and march across Texas. There's a real reality to people enjoying their summer. And so the political season will truly begin in late August, early September. And we'll continue our march across Texas talking to people in a meaningful way.
Mr. Gutierrez, I like to end interviews with an open mic, open floor situation. So anything you'd like to touch on, anything I didn't ask about, anything on your heart, on your mind that you want to tell viewers, the floor is yours.
Well, listen, you asked me why when we started, and it's real simple. Ted Cruz doesn't embody our values as Texans. He just doesn't. You don't run out. You don't leave your friends when times are bad, when it gets cold. You don't go off and endorse people like Donald Trump that are charlatans. You go off and you help people and you listen to people and you fix their problems, or do the best you can. We have to fix the issues that are facing us in healthcare, in education, in infrastructure, and common sense gun solutions. We absolutely can do this. It's going to take all of us working together to do this. But we can make this state better for all of us. And it's really about making it better for each and every one of us. and we'll all have to do our part. But we can get there. We can get there, but we have to stop voting for people like Ted Cruz that do nothing, absolutely nothing, to help us all live a better life.
Mr. Gutierrez, thank you for your time.
Thank you.